Hello. All right, so today we're doing Latinos in the Cold War. And what it does is it runs into the temptation is to, in linear fashion, to link it to the subsequent Chicano movement and the civil rights movement. All right. So when we look at that, that's something that you usually keep in mind that's coming next as far as the next topic chronologically. All right, and people like to connect the two. All right, so we're going to be no different in doing that. So what I do is this is not a unique argument. Get it from the books. Is the argument is that the Cold War both equipped and um, and angered and provoked Latin Americans, Latinos here in the U.S. To get them in preparation for the civil rights movement. All right. So for one thing, I wish I had it with me available, but there was a sociological experiment in which they were deliberately wronging people at a certain public venue. They were like depriving them of their proper service for the money that they paid, etc. And at any rate, they were looking for a pattern amongst those who stood up and refused to be wronged, right? And wanted to and took a stand and said, "No, I want to speak to your boss. I'm not leaving until I do, and we're gonna fix this, right?" And what they found is that rather than just simply being socioeconomic, rather than being ethnic or religious or cultural, oftentimes they found the line in the sand was educational. That a lot of people who stood up for themselves and demanded a rectification of their wrong had a college education, and a lot of those who kind of took it in the chin and didn't fight it did not have a college education. So it's something to think about. So at any rate, you have the development of a quote colored middle class during the early Cold War at the end of World War II. And a lot of it is right here, the GI Bill, right? The GI Bill provided economic and educational assistance to veterans, including low cost mortgages, low interest loans to start a business, 1 year of unemployment compensation, cash payments of tuition and living expenses for those attending college or vocational schools. Over 500,000 veterans eligible for such federal patronage were of Hispanic origin. All right. And then you see here the number of Latino college graduates in states like California doubled between 1940 and 1960. So Hispanic Americans took advantage of the GI Bill, as they should have, and were able to grab a home, an FHA home, and also a college education that was subsidized by the federal government. All right. So while this is happening, oh, excuse me, that supposedly gives them an experience, right? And so for one, you have to remember also is, I think of like a Jose Angel Gutierrez of the Chicano movement in Texas. This guy was studying Mahatma Gandhi in India and his methods of nonviolent civil disobedience. They are studying instances in Africa of decolonization from European imperialist powers. So, Portugal and some of these other old school European imperialist nations were losing their African colonies at this time. And then in addition to that, you had the development of NATO as a military alliance, just in case the Allies were to fight the Soviet Union. And then you had the Warsaw Pact on behalf of the Soviet Union and her allies as a military contingency plan. And they were trying to win over these newly these newly independent Asian and African countries, all right, into their orbit. And in doing so, the Soviet Union called the United States out on its treatment of people of color in its own country, and kind of saying, right, okay, why would you as an African country want to join NATO with the United States when they treat their people of color in the United States like garbage, right? And so we were called out on that, and it's no coincidence that while this is going on, probably we in the State Department, in the armed forces, we finally desegregated black and white soldiers and people in the State Department. So at any rate, we're privy to this, and we're trying to win allies. All right. So you have that going on, and then you have more purchasing power on behalf of the average American, increased by 20%, which is pretty impressive. But it says here, offering a stepping stone toward the American dream via or by way of the hard road of blue-collar labor unions like the CIO open membership to Latinos, while Latino mutual aid societies, okay, and the Federal Fair Employment Practices Commission made some effort to ensure that Latinos did not suffer discrimination in their employment. As for housing discrimination, housing contracts often prohibited resale to non-whites. But outside of Texas, federal and state census-oriented entities labeled Hispanics as whites. All right, and so not that that's a good thing that they're still doing that, but the different organizations like LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, were fighting to get Hispanic people classified as white, and it worked outside of Texas. So hence, Latinos during the 1950s statistically had a much better chance than had their predecessors to live a more materially successful lifestyle. So they're getting a college education. Some of them are buying suburban homes, or many of them, and they are earning up to 20% more, okay, during the 1950s. However, right, there are a few things, an underbelly to all this. Okay, first of all, the fruits of the American post-war boom were not evenly distributed. I believe it was 1/5. Yeah, 1/5 of American families remained below the poverty line. And most of those who were found within that 1/5 of poverty-stricken Americans were Native Americans, African Americans, and yes, Hispanics. So Latinos were not well represented in the massive growth in suburban home ownership, but instead, statistically, much more likely to remain ensconced in urban ghettos, ethnic enclaves like Puerto Rican East Harlem and Mexican Boyle Heights, all right, from which there was no easy escape, according to the books, all right? And so, and then in doing that, there was still that negative caricature of the Mexican and of the, especially during the 1950s, of the Puerto Rican in New York, that they were criminally prone, okay? That their poverty bred ignorance and desperation and lack of hope, and that was a terrible mixture that was making them more prone to commit violent crimes than other contemporaries, all right? So you see here, painted with the same broad brush, claiming to have been addressed, "You are a Puerto Rican. Do you carry a knife?" Okay. So not only were Latinos marginalized and stereotyped during the early Cold War, they witnessed their ancestral nations victimized by American geopolitics. So what had happened, as we've gone over some of this, is the Monroe Doctrine stated Europeans stay out of Latin America, right? And then Teddy Roosevelt gave a corollary or addition to the Monroe Doctrine that was addressed not to the European nations as originally intended, but toward the Latin American nations. And he told them basically to behave. He told them to be politically stable and to be economically responsible in gaining loans from European banks and European countries to pay those loans back faithfully and to not have coups and civil wars, refuse to acknowledge election results, etc., that led to riots and civil wars, etc., in the Dominican Republic and Haiti and other countries where this happened quite often. So at any rate, we contended that if they did that, we would intervene. All right. And then to make matters worse is we began to condone right-wing dictatorships simply because they were on our side in the Cold War. Remember, the Cold War was a time of ideological competition, geopolitical race, and arms race, right, between us and the Soviet Union. Okay. And so at this time, if someone was adamantly anti-communist, no matter what his stance was on human rights, we acknowledged him and even patronized him, even helped pay for his military buildup, etc. So you see here, Franklin Roosevelt said Anastasio Somoza of Nicaragua may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch, meaning that he at least is anti-communism. And there was a guy named Trujillo in the Dominican Republic and other areas in Latin America whereby we acknowledge these brutal right-wing dictators simply because they passed the duck test. They didn't walk like a duck, quack like a duck, etc., like a communist, right? And what was the number one thing that they could do and looking like a communist? And that was any type of wealth or property redistribution, right? We said that they had to have been communist. So, for instance, Jacobo Arbenz Guzman of Guatemala, he contended that any land that was laying fallow for a certain amount of time and was not being cultivated had to be sold back to the government, and the government would pay them, like in the sense of like eminent domain, would compensate them at market price. But they would have to sell that land back that they're not using so that the government could help out the peasants, the poor people of the country. And so that was too akin to communism for our State Department, for our CIA. And so we would have these coups where we'd overthrow these leaders of these foreign Latin American countries because they failed our duck test about communism. And so, they especially if they simply confiscated the property and it was American corporate property in their country and did not compensate back at market price. So expropriation, I believe, was a term used when they would compensate the owner for that land, and nationalizing usually meant they're just going to take it and it now belonged to the nation. And so I'm getting ahead of myself. Arbenz expropriated, but Fidel Castro in Cuba, he nationalized. He took American corporations' property from them and said it now belongs to Cuba. Okay. So that happens with Fidel Castro. And you can make the argument that we pushed Castro into the arms of Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. He did not come across straight away as a communist. He contended that he was not, but he said that he wanted certain things for the well-being and equity of the Cuban people. He wanted certain lands from oil companies and fruit companies nationalized. And so when he did so, almost immediately, our president, Eisenhower, refused to meet with him. He refused to recognize him as the legitimate new leader of Cuba. And our corporations took things to court there in Cuba, which was to no avail, but still just showing signs of further conflict with Castro. And then it didn't take long for Operation Mongoose. And Operation Mongoose was a CIA plan to assassinate Fidel Castro. And so they tried all kinds of ways to assassinate him to no avail. And then, of course, the Bay of Pigs invasion. And with the Bay of Pigs invasion, there were about 1,300 ex-Cubans who left with the old leader, Fulgencio Batista, and tried to retake their island over. And they were supposed to get, initially in the plans, American aerial support from our jet fighters. But Kennedy was backed into a corner, becoming the new president, in promising the American people that he would not back any type of invasion of Cuba. And so he did not support with jet fighters this invasion of about 1,300 ex-Cuban immigrants, and it failed miserably. But one of them, actually, there was an exception where there was a jet fighter or two that was ahead of the invasion that strafed and shot at and bombed a few sites. And when it landed back in the United States, a reporter peeled off the front of the jet fighter and peeled off the sides, and it was a U.S. fighter jet that was painted over as if it had belonged to the Cuban Fulgencio Batista's old Cuban military, which of course it did not. So we were caught. It was a failure. Fidel Castro pardoned those who had come in and invaded and made us look all the more foolish and pitiful. And so you have that going on. And then Che Guevara. Che Guevara was an Argentine who had his famous motorcycle diaries while he was in medical school, where he went and saw the working and the suffering and the deprivation of the common agricultural laborers and other members of the proletariat throughout Latin America. And he wanted to have a revolution and to kick out the octopus, as they called us, the American corporations, the big oil and fruit companies, etc., that owned the lion's share of countries like Honduras and El Salvador, etc. So at any rate, he went from country to country after he had fought in the Cuban Revolution, trying to foment a communist revolution. And he made no bones about it. He made U.S. corporations as the enemy, the antagonist, the bad guy, and all this, the villain. And so at any rate, our CIA received help from the Bolivian government in capturing him, and we had him executed. And that just made the U.S. look all the more awful in killing this guy who was becoming an iconic leader for Latinos. Okay. And that's him there with he oftentimes wore that army beret. So at any rate, we had him killed. And so notice Latin Americans are, Latinos, they're becoming better educated. They're joining the white collar middle class more progressively. And this is going to supposedly give them and equip them with the self-confidence, the tools they need with their education to be able to participate and even lead facets of the civil rights movement coming ahead. Okay. But also, while they're being equipped, while they're being empowered to make their moves, they're also being disappointed and provoked simultaneously. And that's the thesis here. So at any rate, you also had a culture of forced conformity during the 1950s, right? You had McCarthy put up a list and said that he had a list of 105 or 100 something American State Department workers for the government who were known communist spies. They called it a fifth column, this secret column of spies who were guilty of treason in the country, and they were going to help ensure the fall of the United States from within, rather than worried about the Soviet Union from without. And so remember, you also had a few famous cases, right? So you had the Rosenbergs. They were both executed, husband and wife, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, from the Manhattan Project, right, where we had the nuclear bomb in New Mexico in Los Alamos. They were giving secret information to the Russians on how to create a hydrogen bomb. And so they were tried and executed for it. There was Alger Hiss, who admitted to having been a spy for the State Department up in high-ranking circles in D.C. And he was sought out by a guy named Whittaker Chambers, and that got the nation's attention. Okay, and then you have McCarthy, who said he has this list, right? And he starts having these televised trials, and it was like the Salem witch trials. It's just, you have to see some of it in black and white to really get that I'm not exaggerating. Like he would say, so how long have you been a spy? His premise to every question was that they were already guilty. And of course, they would say that he's ridiculous, that he needs to back up. They're not a spy, et cetera, et cetera. And it was very juvenile, the manner by which these trials were carried out. And eventually, the president himself is going to order that Senator McCarthy have what's the word? There's a legal term where he has to shut up. Yeah, like a gag rule. He could no longer take the floor and speak. And so it kind of shut these trials up. But they went after Hollywood. And again, with Hollywood, right? If you had engaged in any type of support for any version of Robin Hood, right? Stealing from the rich and given to the poor, you were accused of communist sympathies. I kid you not. Just for that one script of that one movie. And so it became almost silly. And so this dark, coercive type of atmosphere. And then, of course, you had who they called the Tsar, the Emperor of the FBI, and that was J. Edgar Hoover. And he had the counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO. Okay. And with COINTELPRO, if he were insulted by someone, if he had anything personal against someone, and if he had any doubts whatsoever, he would put them on a list, and they would have their Fourth Amendment jeopardized, right? Their right to their privacy. He would bug their phones and their homes. He had spies come in and infiltrate. So all the different civil rights movements that we're going to get into next in the final topic, they're going to be infiltrated by COINTELPRO. You can imagine, especially those who advocated any type of use of violence. So like the here in Oakland, the Black Panthers, right? And any group like that, they had a strong presence of the FBI engaging in espionage with them. What they would try to do is they'd put people undercover, and they would try to advocate violent action amongst the other members, the so-called members of the civil rights organization, and they would see if they'd go along with it or not, and see if they could trap them. I mean, literally, it was entrapment, trying to catch them into any type of violation of the American law. So at any rate, you had all that going on, and LULAC, for many reasons, was a very conservative organization, as we're going to get into next with the civil rights movement. They didn't take to the streets. They didn't engage in nonviolent civil disobedience. They didn't march and protests and other things that you're going to see very soon. They just simply fought in the courts for a rectification of wrongs. They wanted to be included as white people. Like I said, very conservative on many counts. They too were infiltrated by the FBI and the counterintelligence program. And Hispanic people increasingly became aware of it. And there was a sense of resentment of this type of coercive, obtrusive atmosphere, this Cold War political culture. Okay. And so much so that Truman stated that he would not turn his country into a right-wing totalitarian government just to combat a left-wing totalitarian threat. And that says something when a president took a stand as such. Eisenhower, after him, took a stand and warned us against the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex was that we were in an arms race with the Soviet Union. We were trying to use, during the 1950s, deterrence. Remember, deterrence is that you keep someone who might possibly be your foe, you keep him afraid of provoking you. You keep him afraid of attacking you by provoking an image of great strength and aggression, that he doesn't want any part of this, right? So we literally kind of provoked the arms race, the nuclear arms race, etc., with the Soviet Union. And in doing so, there were private corporations that made a lot of money off of this by selling, the equipment to the government to make the bombs, the jet fighters, the tanks, the guns, etc. So that's the first group I think of with the military-industrial complex. And then also you have the bureaucracy in the government that is gung-ho, that is for deterrence, the policy of deterrence. It is for aggressiveness in foreign policy, etc. And they're definitely a part of the military-industrial complex as well. So it's a combination of self-interest and getting rich off of building up our military, and being a very zealous, kind of jihadist, ready for aggressive foreign policy and war to come with the Soviet Union. Soviet Union, you see, had a one night, Stalin gave a speech to his Politburo, his leaders, and he said that we need to use more of our budget, the Soviet budget, to build up the military for the inevitable, for the unavoidable, right, war with our capitalist enemies. And of course, everyone knew he meant mainly the United States. So that was heard by an American ambassador who was fluent in Russian. So he hears this, and he immediately, in the middle of the night, brings a famous telegram to the United States, warning that the Soviet Union is planning an inevitable war with us, and that they are starting an arms race to prepare for that inevitable war. So at any rate, that really got things going at that point. All right. So at any rate, yeah. So there you have it here. The Hispanic Americans are further armed and prepared to lead a future civil rights movement. They're learning about civil rights movements in other countries. They are becoming armed with just the knowledge, with the collective confidence, self-confidence, and being now members of the white collar middle class to do such. But they also are being a little bit teased, and that they have a better life, but they're seeing plenty of their fellow Hispanic people who are amongst that 1/5 of Americans who are still below the poverty line. They're still being caricatured in the press as criminally prone, etc. And then they're part of this kind of oppressive, Salem witch trial like atmosphere, Cold War atmosphere. And so it's a curious combination of being equipped and strengthened, but at the same time being provoked to lead the future civil rights movements. All right, any questions from anybody? Right. All right. Well, I hope you guys are doing well. You're almost done. This is the penultimate. This is the second to last assignment before test 4, and then we're done. So I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're hanging in there. And yeah, that's it. Okay, that's it for this week for this subject. You guys take care.